Today's daf we're going to be learning is Sanhedrin Daf Ayin Zayin. Super interesting daf. It's going to recall a whole bunch of things that we learned back in Bava Kama at the end of the second chapter about Adam U'ad Olam and the responsibility of people and their actions and to what extent are people responsible for their actions. It's one of these sugyot that on the one hand is super, super interesting. On the other hand, it's going to be a little bit frustrating to learn in Daf Yomi because we're kind of going to go through case by case without getting into where we're going to see a lot of particular cases, which is one of the styles that Gemara uses. And the question is going to be, how do we apply these? What's the logic behind it? How do we know what we would do in a different case? And that is something we would do if we had an in-depth shiur. I happen to be recording this in advance because I'm out of town, so I don't know, but I'm hoping that the extra content that we have up on our site will be relating to these topics so you can delve into some of them a little bit more, really about people's responsibility and their actions and to what extent we find you liable. Now, it's a little different than damages because we're talking about death penalty. When are you going to be liable? The death penalty for what you do. So we're always going to be more hesitant to make you liable. The death penalty, and the question is, can we apply the same thing for damages? Is it the same criteria? Is it different criteria? So even though you're going to say to a few of these cases, what? You're not liable for killing a person in that kind of way? Seems like you really did cause their death, like we saw even in the Mishnah. But it's you have to understand that in order to kill somebody, we want to, right? It doesn't mean it's allowed. It doesn't mean we think it's great you did it. And the question is also, I didn't check out, halachically, do we do anything to you for having done this? But what we're dealing with here is, can we give you the death penalty? And the answer in a lot of the cases is going to be no. Again, there's a bunch of different criteria we're going to talk about. So when I said it might be a little frustrating in the end is because you'd love to come out with very clear-cut definitions. And, unless even if you read all the commentaries, you're still not going to have clear-cut definitions because each one's going to say, oh, this is how I view it, but someone else is going to say otherwise because everyone's going to have a bit of a weak link somewhere. So that's really the purpose of a more in-depth shiur that can start analyzing all these topics. So let's start reading. We have at the end, we talked about this mitzamtzem and this idea about kavash. I didn't even put you in the water, but I made sure you didn't get out of the water. I'm responsible. And that they call mitzamtzem because I'm kind of sticking you in a very small space that you can't get out of. So now the Gemara says we ended with this machloket in a particular case. We had a case where there was someone who, and this is damages. And here we're going to start already comparing damages to death penalty. Someone who left out his friend's animal, and the animal left it out in the sun and wouldn't let it back into the shade. And because of that, the animal died. And the question is the person responsible to pay the friend back for the damage? Now, it is death, but it's death of an animal, which is viewed differently. And it's in the realm of dine mamono, of returning property. So, Ravina Mechayev, Rav Acha Barav Patar. We said we get to today. Why? So we're right at the bottom of Ayin Vav Amud Bet. Ravina Mechayev Kavachomer. He says, oh, it's very simple Kavachomer. Uma רוצח שלא עשה בו שוגג כמזיד ואונס כרצון, חייב בו את המצמצם. If I mentioned the end of the second chapter of Bava Kama, that was our big thing. Adam U'ad Olam, a person's always responsible. Bein ba'onis, bein b'shogeg, bein b'mezid, bein b'ratzon. Whether they intentionally did, didn't intentionally do it, okay? All those ways are going to be obligated. Now, with death, you're not obligated. If I kill you, murder, accidentally, I'm not liable to get the death penalty. So, if in the death penalty, where we don't make me responsible in all cases, even if it's accidental or unintentional, and yet, and yet they said, but I'm going to be responsible if I close you into some area and don't let you get out and you die. So nizikin, so therefore, in damages, what do you think all the more so? In damages, we're going to require you in all sorts of cases that we wouldn't require you we wouldn't obligate you in death. Like if you were forced into doing it, right, in the end, you caused the damage, right? Or it was unwitting, you didn't mean to. So all the more so, we're going to obligate you in the mitzamtzim. Now you might ask, wait a minute, this is like a kavachomer. And ein onshim adin, we don't punish based on kavachomer. We've learned that. But that's actually very interesting. The Aruch LaNer says that doesn't apply in dine mamono, ein onshim adin. That's only ein onshim, punishments like lashes, punishments like death penalty, but it doesn't apply to monetary requirements, and therefore that wouldn't be applicable here, and therefore the Kavachomer stands. But in any case, we have an alternative opinion here. Rav Acha Barav Potel. Why? I'm Rav Masharshia. So Rav Masharshia comes and says in a minute, we'll see it's his great grandson. My time de avua de abba de potel. Okay, what's the reason for my grandfather? Sorry, it's his grandfather, Rav Acha. I meant to say Rav is his great grandfather, but Rav Acha is his grandfather. He says, what's the reason for my grandfather de poter that he exempts? Amar Kra, Mot Jumat Makerot. Now, the beginning of this pasuk is O Be'eva. Now, remember, we learned, if you remember yesterday, the end of yesterday, we said O Be'eva, or that extra word comes to include even mitzamtzem. So that word is said particularly in a pasuk which says, and therefore mot yumad, you will get killed, the makeh, the one who hit the person, because rotzeahu, because he's a murderer. This comes to tell you specifically because he's a murderer, mitzamtzem is forbidden. Birotzeahu dechiyev lan mitzamtzem, b'nezikin lo chayev lan mitzamtzem. But in damages, no. We're not mechayev for mitzamtzem because the mitzamtzem pasuk is very clearly, specifically only because it's a rotzeach. Okay, so that's the machloket, which again, you could say there's even logic to that. If you go with the logic of the first position, there's logic to say, right, Retzach is much more, the consequences are much worse. And therefore, we're only going to be mechayev you in mitzamtzem, in Retzach, in murder, but not if it's only causing damages. I'm a Rava. Now, Rava is a key player today, and interestingly enough, he's a key player also in the sugya, the comparable sugya, the parallel sugya in Bava Kama, which again deals with a lot of these issues, more so about death, about damages. Also, there it gets into this whole thing about Rotzeach B'Shkaga and how we compare damages and who's responsible for damages and who's responsible. Let's go to an Ir Miklat, a refuge city for an accidental murder. So murder does come up there. But anyway, there, the sugya, Rava is a key player in both these sugyas. He clearly thought about these issues a lot. Amar Rava, kfato umet berav patur. If you tie someone up and then they starve because they're tied up, you're actually exempt. Okay, we'll have to understand why in a minute. And like I said, you might not be fully satisfied with these answers because this is all just the commentaries trying to give explanations. The Gemara doesn't really give an explanation. We're just going to have a slew of cases. And the commentaries try to come up with what's the principle behind these cases. Va'amarava, furthermore, he says, but if you tie someone up in the sun and they die, sunstroke, or cold from severe, let's say Siberia, and you leave them outside in the cold for a certain amount of time and they die, chayav. Okay, in that case, you're going to be liable. But the third case, and then we'll try to come up with a rule here. Sof chamalavo, sof tzinalavo, you put someone outside, but it wasn't hot yet, and the heat comes later. Or you put someone in a place, it's not so cold yet, and then the cold comes later. And again, they're bound, they can't move. Patur, you're exempt. So what's the rule behind this? The Meiri explains it pretty well. Again, the different commentators try to give reasons. Fine, right? Everyone, again, has a little bit of a problem that doesn't really fit in. Otherwise, there'd be some very easy answer. It says that basically the famine is not, let's start with the second case, the case where you're obligated. The sun is there. The thing that's going to damage is there right now. The sun or the cold. If the sun comes later, then it's not there at the time you tied the person and you bound them and left them there. So you're not liable. Same way with the famine. Famine is something that over time it develops by not eating. You don't die right away. So it's the not eating, but even though the sun, you don't die right away either. It's why it's a little tricky. But at least the sun is in existence right now. The starvation isn't yet there. Okay, that's one way to interpret what the difference is. But Amarava. If I bound you in front of a lion, I'd be exempt, even if the lion killed you. Lifnei tushim, but before mosquitoes, chayav. So this sounds a little bit strange. Rashi explains, and again, different interpretations. We'll go with Rashi here. Rashi says, Lifnei ari, di'i nami lo hava kafut. Well, the idea is if you weren't bound, you would have been killed by the lion anyway. So because I bound you, you were already in front of the lion. It's not like I put you in front of a lion. You were already in front of the lion. So if I bound you, it didn't really make a difference. But the Yitushim, you'd be able to get away from them. However, Rav Ashi Amar, afilu lifnei Yitushim nami patur. Rav Ashi disagrees with Rava and says even before mosquitoes, you'd also be exempt. Why? Hane azle v'hane atu. Because this goes back to the what Rava said about the sun not being there. Because what Yitushim are in front of you? A swarm of mosquitoes, we assume some come and some go. So if I put you in front of a swarm of mosquitoes, it's going to take a while till you get killed by them. And by that time, it's not going to be the same mosquitoes that I put in front of you. So Rav Ashi says, based on what Rava himself said earlier, you would say the Yitushim also, I should be exempt. Itmar. Now we're going to have a machloket between Rava and Rabbi Zera, and we're not sure who says what. And then we're going to go back and look at what Rava said before and think that we can figure out what Rava holds, which opinion Rava holds by. So you can already start thinking about it. Itmar, kafa alav gigit. If we put some barrel on top of you and you couldn't breathe, you didn't have enough oxygen in there and you died. Or para alav maziva, or you had a ceiling over you and we opened it up and tons of heat came in, or air came, or freezing cold air, or rain and you drowned, or something happened because we opened it up. Rava v'Rabbi Zera, chadamar chayav, chadamar patur. One said you're obligated, one said you're exempt. Okay, we don't know who says what. Tistayim, we can try to infer that Rava who damar patur, Rava is the one who exempts. Why? Damar Rava, kfato umet berav patur. He said before, if you die from starvation, right, you're patur. Because again, the thing is not really yet there. Now, if we put a gigit on you, right, it's going to take a while till there's no oxygen there. Not like there's something directly causing you to die. Or in the same thing with the house. We open the roof, it doesn't mean all of a sudden you're going to die, right? What's going to cause your death is not necessarily right there. To which the Gemara says, Adrabah, you could say the opposite. To time to Rabbi Zera who damar patur. If you're going to take a statement of Rava and say from this statement we would apply it to here and we would get to the conclusion Rava exempts and therefore Rabbi Zera obligates, but let's take a statement of Rabbi Zera and we can then say, oh, actually from what Rabbi Zera says, it seems like Rabbi Zera exempts, and then you'd have to say Rava obligates. So what are we going to do? So let's see first what they say Rabbi Zera says, and let's see if this works. To stand to Rabbi Zera who damar patur, he must be the one to say exempt. Amar Rabbi Zera, Haiman da'ayle lechavre bebeita deshisha. If you put your friend in a house of marble with no windows, so again, at a certain point, there's not going to be enough air. Ve'adlik leishraga, and you lit a candle, vamate. Now we assume the fumes of the candle. Now it's just a candle, but we assume over time, right? There'll be the carbon dioxide will mess up things, right? And you'll end up not being able to breathe and die. And therefore, he says in that case, chayav. Since you lit this candle in this house where there was no ventilation, that's why the person died and you're responsible. But what does it sound like? What's the inference? Tama da adlik le shraga. It's only because you lit the candle. Halo adlik shraga. And you're only going to die from what? From your own breathing, right? Eventually, you're going to have no more air, not enough oxygen in the room. Okay, so originally it was the oxygen from the candle. Now we're going to talk about there's not enough oxygen in the room because of your own air. Now, if that's the case, you won't be chayav because he only obligated you if you lit a candle, not if you didn't light a candle. It was just the person's own air that caused the problem, the person's own breathing. So they say, therefore, the gigit, which isn't caused by some, right? The gigit is more like lighting a candle. Okay, I'm sorry, it's more like not lighting a candle because the gigit, so you put a barrel over someone again, it's just their own breathing that's going to cause the lack of oxygen there. So therefore, they assume, oh, it must be that he would say patur here. And then Rava would have to be the one to say chayav. And now we're stuck. It seems they both say exempt. To which the Gemara says, don't worry. That second comparison to Rabbi Zera is not really a fair comparison. And you probably were thinking about it already. I was even having trouble explaining it because it doesn't make so much sense. It's not the same thing to put someone in a house, even if it's a small house, a house of marble with a lot of air in the room, right? It's going to take a really long time until there's no more oxygen in that room, versus sticking someone under a barrel where after a few minutes they're going to already be suffocating, or I don't know how long. Depends how big the barrel is. But obviously it's a different situation, which is what the Gemara says. Amrei hata b'lo shraga lo matchil havla b'shate. Okay, if we go back to what we were talking about before, in the house, if you don't light a candle, there's certainly nothing's going to happen for a while, right? When you put that person in the room, there's no, right? They're breathing totally normally. There's no problem at all. But hacha below shraga, but under the gigit, under that barrel, nami matchil havla b'shate. Immediately already you're going to have trouble breathing. Okay, and therefore, even though you're not going to suffocate at that point, it's already the process has started. And therefore, it would actually seem like Rabbi Zera is mechayev, just like with the candle, and he's not mechayev, and therefore he would be mechayev in our case, and Rava is the one who would say you're exempt. Okay, we're already on Amud Bet now, starting at the second line. Siman, we have a siman for the next four statements that Rava is going to make. Sulam tris samanim bekotel. Okay, and there's going to be a certain development here of cases. Amarava, like I would say, you're going to be theoretically, you would think more responsible with each successive case, and yet in the end, you're going to be exempt. Amarava, tachafo lebol v'sulam bebol. I throw you into a pit, but there's a ladder in there, so you can get out. Now, already this means that my act of throwing you in the pit is actually not an act of killing you because you have a way out. So, in order to be liable for death, you have to have an act that could murder. This is an act that can't murder. However, ba'achir v'silko, let's say someone comes and takes away the ladder. Now, retroactively, this turns my act into an act of murder because I kind of killed you, right? But we don't do retroactive here. We do what happened at the time of the act. At the time of the act, it wasn't an act of murder. Now, if someone else comes and pulls the ladder out, that's not my fault. Now, were they responsible? No. And in fact, not only are they not responsible, afilu hu kadam v'silko. Even if I threw you in the pit and then I pulled out the ladder after, even though in the end, 1 + 1 is 2, right? I did an act that wasn't a full act because it wasn't an act of murder. Then I did another act, which is not a full act either. But theoretically, it all adds up to I killed you. I'm still not responsible. Why is that? Okay, so first they tell you why you're not liable for the first act. Because because when I threw you into the pit, you could have gotten out, and therefore I didn't do an act of murder. And if you say maybe by picking up the ladder, I did an act of murder, it's like dachafo l'tochamayim, right? Kavasho told l'tochamayim, right? Where you wouldn't let the person out. It's sort of like that, but it's not because it's grama. There in the Mishnah, I kind of put something over you and physically wouldn't let you out of the water. But here, I just took away your means of escape. Now that's a grama, that's an indirect cause of your death. We're not liable we can't make you liable for death by causing someone's death indirectly. Okay. And like I said, again, in the Sugyot in Bava Kama, end of second chapter, it's all about grama also. So now we have Amarava, second case. Zarak bochetz. This is a little more direct. I didn't just push you into a pit, but I actually threw an arrow at you. However, tris biado, but you had a shield you were holding in your hand. So it wasn't like the arrow was going to hit you. And again, so the act of shooting the arrow is nothing. However, if someone came and grabbed the shield out of your hand before the arrow got to you and then it killed you, somehow I ran super speed. I quickly pulled it away before the arrow got there. I could run faster than an arrow. Patur, I'm still exempt. Again, to be idam mifsak psike gere. It's the same reason. It's just even more you would have thought I was responsible, but no. Because my arrows, when I shot them, they weren't really arrows. They didn't have power to do anything because you were holding a shield that was going to stop them. And the fact that we took away the shield after, that's all grama, that's indirect. V'amarava, zarak bo chetz v'samanim biyado. I shot an arrow straight at you, but there's a way for this arrow, okay, let's say it didn't pierce your body, but it poisoned you. Let's say there was some poison on it. The poison got into you, and you have a cure for it in your hand, and you can take that medicine, and it will resolve the problem. But somebody came and scattered, right, threw it on the floor. Even if I myself came and I shot the arrow, I ran, I took the samanim in your hand and I spilled them on the ground so you can't save yourself. Again, patur. So here it's even more direct. Actually, right, chetz hit you and hit you from my shot. And yet I'm going to be exempt to be because when I shot it at you, you had a way to resolve this problem on your own. Comes Rav Ashi, and he's going to add to this before we get to the fourth case. Even if the person didn't have the samanim in their hand, but they could go to the drugstore and buy them and they were in stock, then it works. Then again, what does it mean it works? I'm not liable because even though, okay, the assumption is you don't need to take the antidote right away, you have some time till you can go to the store and buy it. And if you could have bought it and you didn't, it's not my fault anymore. This is like throwing someone in the water and they could have gotten out, but they didn't. So now Rav Acha, the son of Rava, asked Rav Ashi the following question. What if at the time, here's an interesting question. This gets to what we're talking about. What did we say? When I shot the arrows, you had medicine or you could have gotten medicine. What if there was no medicine in the shuk at the time? None was being sold. They were out of stock. So when I shot you, actually, it should have killed you. However, let's say you have a day And within that day came a delivery of all the medicine. And now you can get the medicine. And then you don't go to the store, you don't buy the medicine, and then you die. Am I responsible? Because in a sense, in this case, I don't have the problem that when I did the act, I actually could have killed you at the time because the medicine wasn't available. So Amarle, Hare Yatsami Beitin Zakai. He says, this is like someone, if you remember in the beginning of Masechet, if the court rules that you're exempt forever. Like you don't, they can't ever convict you again. So what does he say? How does this answer? Well, let's take the case. Okay, at 9 o'clock in the morning, I shoot the arrows. There's no medicine in the shuk. By 12 o'clock, there is. Now, let's say we take me to court at 12 o'clock for what I did. Now, you didn't even die yet, right? You could still save yourself. So, of course, I'm not going to be liable because I didn't do an act of death at this point. If they judge me at 12 when there's drugs in the shuk to save you, I won't be liable. So therefore, even though they didn't judge me then, it's as if I was exonerated and I can't be convicted. What it really is saying is the fact that even though at the time I could have killed you, since you had an opportunity to help yourself, this is interesting. It's sort of about telling you the responsibility of yourself to save yourself from getting killed. You can't just say, oh, what's the difference? I'll just make the person liable. I mean, no one would ever want to do that anyway. They wouldn't want to die and then just say, oh, I don't care. Someone will be liable for it. They'll die in court. Yeah, they'll die by the court. But anyway, it seems to be placing the onus on the other person. By the way, we talked about this a lot in Adam Mu'ad Olam, when we had those sugyas in Baba Kama, about, in a sense, it says people are always responsible, but then the sugya immediately starts talking about people who aren't responsible. Usually, when they're not responsible, it's because someone else is more responsible than they are. And this is the person themselves should have gotten the drug, and the antidote, and should have protected themselves. Okay, case 4. Now we're going to talk about another interesting case. Hamarava. Zarak sror bakotel. You threw a stone at a wall. V'chazra la'achoreha. Okay, this is from the impact, right? You throw, this is like kids playing. We're going to talk about kids playing ball in another minute, or squash, for example, where it's very powerful. And if that ball comes back and smacks the other person, is that because of you or is it because of the wall? Right? The wall, in a sense, I hit it against the wall, but the wall hit it back to you. Although it's not really the wall, it comes from, right. We all know if I hit it really hard against the wall, it's going to go really fast and really hard. If I hit it with very low strength, then it's not going to go very far. So Rava says if you throw a toward a kotel and chazra la'chorea and killed someone from the rebound, chayav. Here Rava says you're going to be liable. Vitan Atunan is brighter that supports. Kigon elu amasachakim b'kadur shaharago, just like people who play with a ball and kill. B'mezid neharagim, if they did it intentionally while they were playing, they play squash with your arch enemy and you intend to kill them. Neharagim, you get killed. Bishogeg, if you were just playing a nice game of squash, but you were playing very intense and you accidentally killed the other person, golim. Okay, so here you have, right, you would go to the Ir Miklat, the refuge city, you'd be liable. Bishogeg golim pshita. The Gemara says, of course, if you accidentally kill them, obviously you're going to have to go to Ir Miklat. What are we telling you? So they said, yeah, really, that's not so surprising. Everybody knows that. But they told you this really to say b'mezid neharagim. They wanted you to know that if you do it intentionally, you're going to get killed. Itzriched, right? That was the case that was needed. Why? Well, okay, let's think about a squash game. You can't really know exactly where the ball's going unless you're really expert and you have excellent aim. But let's say most people can't. Even then, I'm not sure you could really tell exactly. So ma'u detema hatrat safeki mi yemer dehadra. It's when someone warns you in order to get the death penalty, you have to have been warned. You know that if you do that, you're gonna be liable to the death penalty. Now you don't know, not like you're shooting directly and you know you have a good shot and you can kill that person straight in front of you. Here you're gonna have to base it on how the angle it hits the wall and how it's gonna hit them. And it's not clear it's gonna happen. So maybe it's like a warning that's a warning out of safek, a warning out of doubt. It's not clear the action's actually gonna happen. And usually we say that doesn't work. So kamash malan, this comes to teach you actually it would in this case. Okay, because maybe we do think that people can judge the angles and how they can hit someone. Tani Rav Tachlif Bar Ma'arava. So now we're sticking with this topic a little bit more. Rav Tachlif Bar Ma'arava brings a braita kamei de Rabbi Abau in front of Rabbi Abau, and here's his braita kigon elu hamasachakim bekadur shaharago. Okay, like the people who play ball, like we said. Here it's going to be a little different. Toch arba amo patul, chutz arba amo chayav. If the person who you kill is standing within 4 cubits of the wall, you're exempt. If they're standing back 4 cubits or farther, you're obligated. So Amalei Ravina, now here seems like we're talking about, although, right, Rashi says we're talking about Galut, that if it accidentally kills them, you're only obligated if they're farther than 4 cubits away and not within 4 cubits. Now, even in accidental murder, it has to be that you intended for it to get there. If you didn't intend for it to get there, then you're not even shogeg. What usually means is you intended for it to get there, but let's say you didn't know the person was there and you should have checked, right? Like the case in the Torah is you're chopping in the woods and something flies backwards and you just didn't even know it right from your axe and you just didn't even know anyone was there. Like you should pay attention because those things happen. And you should know what's going on around you and that's why you're liable. Again, you're liable to go to the refuge city. You're not liable. You didn't do it intentionally. So now the Gemara is going to ask, I don't understand what this is all about. Why 4 cubits? Okay, why is that? It sounds very arbitrary. And Amarle Ravina le Ravashi Echidami, what's the case? If that's where you wanted it to go, within 4 cubits, afilu portanami, even less than 4 cubits, you should be liable. You were intending for the ball to go there. It accidentally hit a person. You didn't know the person was there. Of course, you should be liable. Ideloni chale, if it wasn't good for you for the ball to be there, and that wasn't where you were intending it to go, and then all of a sudden it hits this person because you had bad aim or something, afilu tuvanamilo, even if it's farther than 4 cubits the person was standing, you should not be obligated at all. So why did this Braita put it at 4 cubits? So Amarle, Rav Ashi explains, Stam kador kama da'ile tfei menach nichale. This is the rules of the ball game. The farther away you hit it, the better. Nobody wants a ball when you're playing one of these games for it to go within 4 cubits, and that's why. The 4 cubits is explaining to us, did you intend it or not? If it's within 4 cubits, we know you didn't intend for it to be there, and we're going to exempt you. Once it's farther than 4 cubits, we're going to assume you intended for it to be there, and therefore the person you'll be liable to go to the Ir Miklat if you accidentally kill them. Now the Gemara is going to ask a few questions because really one question with a bunch of sources that raise the problem. Lememra, I believe it's 2 questions. Lememra dechia gavna kochohu. But wait a minute. This is all premised on when I hit that ball against the wall and the ball boomerangs back or, the rebound. That's all considered my strength, right? It's from my strength that it went there because if it's not my strength, it's grama. Remember, kocho is the opposite of grama. Grama is indirect. We're going to call this direct damages. But that doesn't seem to be direct because we're going to take sugyas from a whole different world. And we're going to talk about from the world of purity and impurity and from the world of the Efer Paraduma, making the potion that they would use for the Paraduma waters. They would take the ashes from the red heifer and they would mix them in water. Now, the ashes have to be put in directly by the person who's doing it. So now it says, and now we're going to talk about what's considered direct. If it rebounds off something, then we're going to show it's not considered direct, and that's going to contradict our sugya here. It's always a question when you bring these sugyas of something totally different, can you really compare those? But the Gemara is going to assume we make this comparison. Urimini says in the following Mishnah, Hamikadesh v'nafal kiddush al yado. Okay, you make this paraduma, you take the waters and you want to put the ashes inside, and it fell on your hand on the way down. Oh, alatzad, or it fell on the side of the vessel that it's going into in the water, but not into the water directly. And then achar kaf nafala shoket, and then it falls in. So it basically rebounds either on your hand or on the wall of the vessel. Pasul, this water is no good because it didn't come directly from the person's hand. So what do you see here? Even though it was on its way and it blocked by something else, right? As soon as it hits something else, we're done. It's no longer considered directly from your hands. That goes against what we just said. Which they answer, now we're talking here when it goes from your hand or the side, it's where it hits your hand and kind of stops and then drips down. Okay, so we have the ashes gets into your hand and then it slowly falls down. Or it hits the side and then it slowly goes down. Not that it hits and bounces off. Not like that. And then it's not a question. Second source, Tashma. You had a needle that was impure, that was on a piece of earthenware vessel, and you sprinkled on it. But you're not sure if it went first onto the needle or first onto the vessel and bounced back onto the needle. And then when you sprinkle the paraduma waters on it to purify it, it then jumped back onto there and messed it up. Okay, this is for something that had too much mate on it. It also needs the hazah of the waters. So now, Pasul, disqualified. So now they say, wait a minute. Um, they say, but wait, right? This shows that if it boomerangs off, rebounds off, it's not going to be good. Same thing. To which they say, because again, there it has to be sprinkled. You have to sprinkle the paraduma waters on it, and it's not direct sprinkling, right? It's a different case of paraduma. For is the preparing the water. This is purifying something, but it's the same idea. Amarav Chinan Abar Yehuda Mishmei Derav Matza Itmar. Don't say Mitza Alav like it bounced back onto it, spritzed onto it, as we would say, but it's Matzah, or it was found. Let's say, in other words, if it, you're not sure if it went onto the cheres and then found its way, meaning it went on the cheres and then slowly dripped down. That already isn't from the impact and from the hitting of it and the boomerang, the rebounding, but that would be something different. And then it wouldn't teach us anything about if it rebounds. So we resolved both our questions, and now we're moving on to Rav Papa. Amar Rav Papa, Hi man de kafte lechavre va'ashkelele bidka demaya. Let's say I tie up a person. Okay, again, it's terrible scenarios. Why anyone would do this, I don't know. And then there's a wall that was blocking water from coming in. And I open a big hole in that wall, and the water comes streaming in, and you drown in that water. Let's say you're like in an empty pool or something. Fills up, and you drown. So, Gire Didehu Machayev. That's my direct involvement caused your death. Because I opened that thing, it sprayed on you, and you're dead. Hani Mile B'Koach Rishon. But that's only if it's from the direct spurt of the water. Aval b'koach sheni grama ba'almahu. But if it's already koach sheni, which we're going to have to see what that is, then it's already indirect. So there's a bunch of different opinions of what exactly koach sheni is. I'm going to go here with the two options the Yad Ramah brings, even though there's many other possibilities. The Yad Ramah says, when I open that breach in the wall, a whole spurt of water comes out. And then let's say more water comes later, like water that comes from somewhere else, which is already like the second stream, it's not as strong. It's already like second, that would be koach sheni. That's one possibility. Or let's say the water streams in and then it goes into the ground, seeps into the ground and comes out somewhere else and goes in a different direction. That already was stopped by something and then is koach sheni already. That's already indirect. Okay, so however you understand it, there's different ways as well, other options, but we'll go with those two. V'amar Papa zarak tzror lamala. Here we're going to end with a very interesting conversation about gravity. You throw a rock up in the air, and al chalit stadim. But when it comes down, it doesn't come down the exact place, right? You ever play catch with yourself, try to throw the ball up in the air and have it come down? It doesn't always come down the exact same place, right? It depends how good your aim is. If you have really good aim, you could do it straight up and it'll come straight down. And we're going to talk about that very soon. But often it goes off to the side. So now it went off to the side and killed someone. Chayav, you're liable. So I'm really Marbar Avash, the Rav Papa. Marbar Avash says, what are you talking about? How could you be liable? My time, I'm shum de kochohu. What? It's because it's your koach? Well, where did your koach take it? Your koach took it up, right? Ikocho tezalael. Your kocho would only, if it was all just based on my koach, it would just go up. Now, obviously, we all know everything falls down, gravity. Well, that's how Rav Papa responds. I'm just going to go a little bit more into tomorrow's daf. Ilav kochohu, Rav Papa says. If it was all my kocho, teza latacha, right? In other words, it would immediately fall. Now, if we say what he's saying is he's not saying he avoids gravity, but what he's saying is if it wasn't all my kocho, right? And my kocho had nothing to do with it, then where should it have fallen? Gravity would have brought it down straight down to where I threw it. And it didn't. So what does that prove? It proves elakoch kachushu. It proves what I said before. That when I throw it up in the air, where it goes is actually somewhat dependent on me. Now, it's true, it's gravity is bringing it down, but it's partially dependent on me where it goes. Because if I have bad aim and I can't get it straight up, it's going to go off to the side. So, as a result, it is my fault. And that's why Rav Papa's mechayev. That's an interesting way to end about how gravity plays a role and how, both play a role, both the person throwing it and the gravity together. Okay, so what we really saw today, I'm not going to go through the daf in terms of part by part, but really we dealt with, I'll just talk about it overall, this issue of seeing different cases where either one causes damages or mostly one causes death. And the question is, right, we started low with damages, but then went back to death right away. And to talk about in what cases am I going to get the death penalty and what not. We learned about grama. We learned about, if my action in and of itself isn't enough to cause you death, even though ultimately it does, right? And all different issues that come up in this realm. And like I said, there's way more you could go in depth into these cases, try to come up with rules and what this shows about our responsibility. Very interesting topic. And with this, we'll finish for today. Wishing everyone a good day.